I'm the executive director of a nonprofit in Allentown called Ripple Community Inc. We are a relatively young organization. We are just turning 5 years old next month, but we developed out of the work of a church also called Ripple in Allentown, which is a Mennonite church that's been working in the city for quite a while. So Ripple Community Inc. is an independent nonprofit organization that we run two primary programs. One is a day center, a community center that is open to the public, though we primarily serve people who are either experiencing homelessness or living with other conditions that might be socially isolating, or such as histories of mental illness or trauma or abuse or addiction, things that have just made life a little bit more challenging. So the day center is essentially exists to be a safe and welcoming place where anybody who needs a little bit of extra social support or connection is welcome to come in and spend time with us, and either kind of sit quietly and enjoy a cup of coffee, or engage with other people who are in the center who might have some similar life experiences. Part of the day center, the community building center, is also what we've been calling our service hub, which is a space where we invite some of our partner organizations in to provide more specialized services. So we have a group called the street medicine team that comes in and will conduct medical clinics. We have a group, the parish nurses, that come and provide various types of medical related social support. We have partners from the county offices of mental health and drug and alcohol abuse. So just different organizations that have a kind of more specialized focus can come provide those services at our center. And it just makes it a lot easier, one, for our community members to access the services they need, so they're not kind of running all over town trying to track those down. And it makes it easier for our partner organizations to find their clients, because they're kind of in a centralized location where they can otherwise be a little bit tricky to find. So that's one program, and that was our first program that we started 5 years ago. And then more recently, a couple of years ago, we started the RCI Village Housing Program, which is a permanent community supported affordable housing program that is designed to help people permanently transition out of homelessness or out of housing instability of different kinds. It's a program based on a different model in Washington, D.C. called Jubilee Housing. That basically starts with very affordable, well-maintained rental housing that's considered permanent. So that means once people come into the program, they're welcome to stay for as long as it makes sense to them. We don't have a timeline or a deadline that they need to leave. And our goal is to really make sure that people are successful in maintaining that housing long term. So we take the housing, and we have then a suite of different wraparound services, including really individualized staff support, where we work with all of the residents one-on-one to address anything that might cause them to become housing unstable. So whether that was an issue they've had in the past or new challenges that arise, we provide those kind of specialized supports to make sure they can stay in their home, have that housing stability that really is critical to stability in every other aspect of their lives. And then the third piece of the program is that it's a community-centric program, meaning we essentially want to make sure that our residents are not isolated, they're not lonely, that they're part of a community where they know their neighbors, where they feel connected, where they feel like they belong in their homes. And so we have all sorts of different activities that we do that help our residents to get to know one another. So, we do things like bi-weekly potluck dinners and movie nights and different holiday events and things like that, so that we kind of build that strong community among our residents. So. Yeah, so I first I first heard and maybe started taking seriously of the pandemic in January, which I remember because I was on vacation. And so my partner and I had gone to New Hampshire for a winter vacation, and started hearing a little bit more about the virus spreading and issues that it was causing to people's health. And that was when I first started having some just very initial conversations with some of our partners at the hospitals and some other, connections in the health field, just to say, hey, is this what's happening here? Is this something we need to be concerned about? But I think, for me personally, it was hard, to think about what were my expectations. I think I had no idea, right? And certainly, even when it became clear that this was something that was going to be impacting us directly here in the United States, in Allentown, our community members at RCI, I think it was just, it was kind of hard to imagine how big and how impactful it was going to be. And I distinctly remember thinking, maybe it's just going to be a rough few months and then we'll come out on the other side, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was wrong. That was correct.
At what point did you realize that the pandemic was going to change the way that you were going to work with your clients?
Yeah, so I would say in early March. It might have been a little bit before that, but when we started seeing cases on the West Coast, I think that's when, just the reality of things hit home for me, and, I think for other organizations in the area as well. I think one of the tricky things in those early days was just that no one really knew what to do, right? So there was kind of this period where we knew that it was going to be problematic. We knew that it was going to be dangerous. We assumed, I think correctly, that it might be more dangerous for people, with whom we work than, others in the community. But it wasn't, kind of even with that heightened awareness, it wasn't immediately clear what we needed to do. It was clear that we would need to do something different. But it took some time to kind of figure out what exactly that needed to look like, and still evolving. Yes. So I think, if we think back to the earlier stages of the pandemic, and we really put some new practices in place at RCI once there started to be cases in this general region, and then particularly in the Lehigh Valley. And so we made the decision early on, and it was in some ways an easy decision, that we were going to keep our community center open, even though we knew, as you asked previously, that this was going to be impacting, people in our community very directly. And we made that decision because we knew, as the governor and others started talking about, stay-at-home orders, and when we started to understand that we really needed to be thinking about physical distancing and taking some of these precautionary measures, we knew that wasn't an option, right, for people we worked with. And so, it's great to stay at home if you have, a door to close and a refrigerator and running water, all of those things that are kind of assumed. But if you don't have those things, then being in a pandemic becomes, that much more dangerous, right? That much riskier. So we, in early March, maybe going into mid-March, made that decision that we would stay open, but also made some other decisions about how we were going to operate. So we we normally at our community center rely pretty heavily on this marvelous group of volunteers who come in regularly and kind of help us, make sure the community's healthy and safe and running well. And we decided that we needed to ask our volunteers to stay home for their safety, and for our community members' safety, we needed to really minimize the amount of outside contact that we were bringing into the center. We had one staff member who was in a vulnerable population, so we asked her to stay home, work from home. And so we kind of really quickly went from a, staff of 5 and a healthy volunteer corps to a staff of 4, and that's all. And so, and then at the same time, we were, consulting with the Allentown, with Vicki Kistler at the Allentown Health Bureau, and our partners at Street Medicine and the parish nurses, just saying, what do we need to be doing to keep people safe, right? That was our question. How do we keep people safe? And so we put into place some of the practices that I think have become pretty standard. We started taking temperatures. We started asking about respiratory symptoms. We started wearing masks and asking our community members to wear masks. And I think our operating assumption then and still now is that because of the population we work with, no one was more at risk. No one was at greater risk because they walked through the doors of RCI, right? RCI is in a building, it's a closed space, right? It can get kind of crowded. Is that ideal? No. And so we did kind of everything we could to make sure we could keep people separated. We opened up an overflow room and did some of those sorts of things, but just kind of knowing where people were when they weren't at RCI, we felt confident that being at RCI was not placing anyone at greater risk. So all of that was happening. And at the same time, we had this just incredible flood of support from the community, from individuals, from other organizations that, many organizations understandably made the decision to close right at the beginning of the pandemic, which made, right, like no one knew what to do.
Right.
And there's certainly a universe in which closing made the most sense, right, for everyone's well-being.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was this kind of incredible surge of support, I would say, that happened where organizations that were, their doors were closed, right, but their staff were working from home. We would get calls from them saying, like, what do you need? How can we help you? Can we drop off some masks? Here's how to, here's 12 hours of research I've done on the CARES Act and how you can apply for funding so that you don't have to do all that work, right? Because all of our energy was going into keeping our doors open, and that was exhausting. And at the same time, individuals and churches were just calling, wanting to make donations, wanting to, see what we needed. Our regular volunteers, who are incredible, couldn't be in the center, but we gave them new jobs. So 2 of them became our, essentially our donations coordinators. So we created a new email address for them and said, if you want to donate, talk to our volunteers and they'll coordinate it, because we just didn't have the capacity.
Sure.
We couldn't answer the phone.
Right.
It was that hectic and that busy. And so I don't know if that answered your question, which I feel like was a long time ago now, but yeah, we've been amazed by the amount of support that we've gotten from all directions, it seems. Yeah. I feel like that's something we're still figuring out. Those first 3 or 4 months were just so intense. And it was sort of a new, when I would talk to my staff, it was like we all had this new form of exhaustion that we didn't quite have all of the words to describe. And it was, just it was the work that we were doing, right? So we were doing, kind of taking over for, tasks and jobs that other people had done. At the same time, we were doing a lot of things that we didn't normally do. Like we historically haven't really served meals at our community center, but when it became clear that that was a need that had developed, and so we went from like 0 to 500 meals a week in a couple of weeks, and that was, again, thanks to a donation from the Regional Mennonite Conference and Pool Trust and Meals on Wheels started delivering hot meals to us, which was fantastic. But that's all, like all of that is like new work that right, was created.
Here it is, now make it happen, right?
And we had to how many times have I walked around saying like 6 feet apart, 6 feet apart, 6 feet apart, right? Or mask over your nose, mask over your nose, mask over your nose. And so there was that kind of that feeling of like we're doing so much more with so much less, like fewer people, right, to kind of make it work inside the center. But then there was just the emotional weight. So we work again with a population that is often, their lives are pretty weighty, right? Like they're pretty tough. They often have a lot going on, and we certainly absorb a good amount of that on a regular basis. But like, take that and then tack on some fear, right? And tack on some scarcity and tack on some concern that the resources they rely on are suddenly, disappearing or drying up or in question. And so that, like all of that was just, we would just sort of go home at night and then just like sit quietly until it was time to go to bed and start over. And so that was the first few months. And so how, and then I think with our community members, just kind of trying to talk through, what's happening. Like, so we always try to share any information we have, right? But things were kind of changing regularly, and we didn't always, necessarily know what was happening. And, some of our community members, understandably, like part of their coping process was to say, this isn't a big deal. People are making it up. We don't need to worry about this, right? Understandable. But not true, right? So then having to kind of work through that and like, yes, but right now we're going to do what we, the best thing we know how to do, and that involves, wearing a mask and taking temperatures and that sort of thing. So I would say we did not cope well those first few months. We just sort of plowed through, and then maybe starting into the 4th and 5th month when it started to become clear that this wasn't going to be a short term. You can do anything for a few months, right? But maybe that was our coping. Like, we'll just suck it up and get through it. And when it became clear that that wasn't going to work out, then we started to come up with try to come up with a little bit of a better plan where we, we created a little bit more of a regular rotation so that we each had one full day off where we weren't working at the center when it was open. There was a time when we instituted mandatory vacations, right? Because we needed a break. And then, as far as our community and kind of coping with our community members, we started trying to kind of return to a little bit of normal. So I think one of the reasons we felt it was really important to stay open is not just to protect everybody's health, right? So at the very least, we could know that the people we care for were getting, we were seeing them once a day. If they had symptoms, we could send them to the hospital. They were getting seen, they were getting checked. We could have had eyes on them, right? Which otherwise wouldn't have been true. But one of the other, the other really main reasons we stayed open is that we're talking about the risk of this virus, which is obviously intense, right? And it's scary and it's dangerous and people are dying, and that's really scary, and we have to act accordingly. But we also had to weigh there are other risks, right? And so isolation is a very real risk for our community members, and sometimes having their routines disrupted, right, is a very real risk. And so we were kind of constantly reassessing, like, what is safest, what is best, what makes the most sense for our community. Like, staying open does not make the most sense for every organization, right, but it did for ours. And so, there were times when, we were just extremely busy, that we would say, okay, the community center is open, only for people who are currently unsheltered, but everyone is welcome, to come in, get some food, get some lunch to go. We'll pack up some groceries. We'll take your temperature. We will take your temperature in the slowest possible way so we can also talk to you for a few minutes, right? Just kind of check in, see what else you need. But if you have another place to stay, like that's going to be safest for you while the center is so busy. When things got quieter, we adjusted. So it's been this sort of constant adjustment. And so, in the last 2 or 3 months, we've been pretty deliberate about trying to get the community center activities kind of back to what they were. And they're not, it doesn't look the same, right? Nothing looks quite the same. But we've, kind of gone back to doing some of our, art therapy projects. And we've gone back to we have these circle discussions where we'll sit down and talk about issues that are important to the community. And that's a way for people to be heard and kind of contribute and to, address any anxieties or whatever it is. There was a time when the parish nurses were only able to work out of the hospital. Now they're back. That's great. People, really miss seeing them face to face. And so we're kind of trying to do what we can do while keeping all of these health and safety, measures in place. But, all along trying to kind of maintain this, sense that there's a community and you're part of it and you're cared for, and we're going to do everything we can to get through this together, I mean, I don't know if surprised is the right word, but I was, like I was saying earlier, just kind of amazed at the response, the broad supportive response. I was, our staff had the option. So I was talking earlier about, people who come into the center not being more at risk for coming in the center. So that's true of everyone except our staff, right? Our staff are more at risk. So our staff had the option of working from home with their full salary. And no one took that option. And that was amazing to me, right? And so that's like bragging a little bit on my staff because,
But that's okay. I think that's okay,
Okay, right? They, kind of chose to be there and show up, even though, kind of knowing, there was a time when one of our staff members was in the emergency room, right? And not well, and that was terrifying and weighty. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's still like it's been how many months now, right, since all of this started, and a lot of things in the world are starting to, look a little bit recognizable again, but really things haven't changed for us much since March. In some ways, like it just got kind of things really ramped up, and now they've kind of stayed that way. And so I'm not sure I've even had time to reflect on what feels surprising. I would tell my future self to trust our community more. I remember our internal client community. I remember the first day our staff started wearing masks. And I knew we needed to wear masks. And I was worried about wearing masks, not because I didn't want to wear a mask, but because I was worried how people would respond to that, right? Like, are you afraid of me? Are you, right? Like there's sort of now we're kind of all used to it, but in March we weren't, right? So like if I'm, wearing a hazmat suit because you're coming into my space, what is that, how does that make you feel?
Sure.
Like there's something wrong with you, right? They're like, I'm afraid that you're going to give me some. And so I just remember that the day we decided to do that, and I was talking with our partners at Street Medicine, and it was early on, and it was before, masks were very common. And so we did it, and I was just so wrong
But that's nice to admit that, right?
yeah, about how people responded, right? And it was, it was much more of a like, thank you for taking care, being thoughtful and taking care, doing what you need to do to take care of us and keep us safe. And so that was helpful, right? And then we sort of knew we could, as those things came up, we could have more conversations about them, right? Like the day we started taking temperatures, not a big deal, right? We just said, this is what we need to do now. And we did it, easy peasy. And that's pretty much been true of all of those changes we've made. I think the other thing I would tell my future self I mean, it's so kitschy, but it's, I think we were just so wildly unprepared, to have something like this happen. And, in those early weeks, we were really concerned about our unsheltered friends because we knew where they were living, and we knew that services they depended on, were closed. We knew that they, didn't have like, just things you take for granted, right? Like bathrooms and running water. And so there was this effort, at the beginning with lots of different nonprofits and the counties and the city to try to, kind of identify what some of the key needs were. And we were finally able to get a couple of like porta potties set up, which sounds like such a small thing, but it was like such a monumental effort to get that done, right? Like so many phone calls and so much problem solving and so much like work. And it just shouldn't, right? It's not, I wish that hadn't been true, right? Like I wish we had been able to move a little bit faster. I wish we would have been able to come up with better solutions. Like keeping RCI open was the best available solution.
Right.
Was it super safe for people to come into a big building, and spend time there? Not really, right? Like it's really not. There are better ways. There could have been better ways to do it, but we weren't, prepared, ready, able, willing, had the resources identified, whatever the issue was to, kind of at the, I guess at more of a system level, right, to adjust in a big way. Like we adjusted in little ways, but we didn't adjust in big ways that I think would have kept people safer. And we were lucky, and we've only ever had one positive case at our center, and that's amazing. But my concern is, we're heading into winter, and, how long before our luck runs out.
Sure.
I think for me, it's been kind of fascinating to look at, and I think these are, they're images I've seen before, right? But of the influenza pandemic at the beginning of the last century, right? Of, I've seen those. I knew it was horrible, right? I read the statistics. I've seen pictures of people with cloth over their faces, and and I do. So I'm a community psychologist, and I do kind of on the side. I still do some research on disasters and recovery from disasters. And so I feel like of all people, like I should have had a better, better sense, right, of what was coming. But it's almost, it's so hard. I feel like it's very hard to explain how dramatic the impact has been. So, you look at those pictures from 100 years ago, and, a year ago, I would have looked at them and thought, yeah, that looked awful. And now I look at them and think, oh, yeah, now I have some sense of the story, right, behind all of those images and behind all of those, deaths, right, that occurred. And, yesterday I venture out so infrequently, but yesterday, just because, I know, right? Like I know everything that I encounter, I take back into RCI, right? And so we just have been very conservative with, wanting to make sure we're not bringing something into the community that's going to be harmful. But, I went for a walk yesterday and passed, I think a mom and a little girl. And, I had a mask on, and the mom had a mask on and the little girl didn't. And the mom, and we were far enough, we were far enough apart, right? We weren't like, but the mom kind of, not unkindly, right? But just instinctively, like grabbed her daughter, who was probably, 5 or 6 years old, and turned her into the mom's body, right? So her face was against her body as I passed, right? Who could have imagined having to do that?
Right.
A year ago, and I just think, that little girl, this is sort of the world that she's growing up in, but for us, it's just a completely altered reality. And so, maybe it's something we should have expected. But I didn't, right? I guess I just didn't. And, are there things that could have been done at every level of, government to keep this from happening? Yes. So I guess that was, as part of what I would want, future generations to know, is that, we don't stay safe by accident, right? We stay safe by planning and by acting on each other's behalf, right? There's a reason we talk about public health, and it's because our health is intertwined. And I feel like if we could kind of take that approach a little bit better, maybe it would help us in other areas. I think about I think I touched on this a little bit, but as all of the signs were going up and the directives, stay at home, isolate, don't go out unless you absolutely have to. I don't know how many people thought, what about people who can't do that, right? And even as Pennsylvania, we kind of went through these staged openings, right? And so we were red for a long time, and then we were orange, and then we were green. And I think as there was a little bit of a collective sigh of relief as things went green for us, that was a really stressful time, because we knew that for our unsheltered friends, at least in the red zone time, there was some sort of accidental separation that was happening, right? Because people were at home, that meant our people were in a little bit of a bubble, right? Even though they were outside, they weren't in homes. They were in a little bit of a bubble of safety. And when we went green and people were out and about more, like all of a sudden that our friends were, much more exposed than they had been. And that's actually when we had our positive case, was after, the county started reopening. And so, I guess care for each other, right? maybe that's my message, right?